Good morning, Senior One. Today we are completing our curriculum for this half of the school year with the final lesson, which talks about animal tissues and their diversity. Names today will be many, so when studying or revising this lesson, a small mental map with some points and an illustration is necessary to make it easier for you to understand the types well. Let's start our lesson today without delaying it. We have four complete types of tissue to talk about with examples, so be aware of them. Let's complete our lesson today with the four types of tissues that we are revising today. We have the first epithelial tissue, and second connective tissue, third muscular tissue, and fourth and final nervous tissue. Let's start with epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue, it's covering the body surfaces and lining the cavities of the body. So it consists of great numbers of attached cells together, adjacent cells together, without very large distance between them, and this distance, a very small distance, filled with a little amount of intercellular substances, which called interstitial substance. So we have greater numbers of cells and very little amount of intercellular substances between them. So we have two main types of the epithelial tissue. We have the simple epithelial tissue and the stratified epithelial tissue, or we can call it complex or compound. So in the plant tissues, we talked before about the simple and the complex. We said there in the plant tissues, simple means one types of cells, but complex mean different types of cells. Here, it's not that like that. Simple means one layer of cells, but stratified mean many layers of cells. So let's start with the epithelial tissue, one simple epithelial tissue. The simple epithelial tissue is one layer of cells, but we have three types of simple epithelial tissue. We have the simple squamous epithelial tissue and the simple squamous epithelial tissue. Squamous means flat cells, so it composed of one layer of flat cells, flattened cells, like that in this picture, and we can find it in the capillary lining, blood capillary, and the walls of air alveoli in the lungs. And the second type is cuboidal epithelial tissue. Cells here in one line like cubes. Simple cuboidal epithelial tissue composed of one layer of cuboidal cells like cubes. We can find it lining the kidney tubules, especially in something in the kidney called nephron. And the third type is simple columnar epithelial tissue. Simple columnar epithelial tissue is like that. We have one layer of columns, columnar epithelial tissue, like that. We can find the columnar epithelial tissue lining the stomach and the intestine. And finally, we have finished the simple epithelial tissue, and the second board, the complex or stratified epithelial tissue. And stratified means many layers above each other. The cells are arranged in many layers, like the stratified squamous epithelial tissue. We have here one type, and this one type, depending on the surface, on the final surface, on the final layer. This final layer is squamous, so it is squamous epithelial tissue. This final layer is cuboidal, so it's cuboidal epithelial tissue, and so on. So we have one type here, stratified squamous epithelial tissue. It's composed of many layers or arranged cells above each other, but the upper layer is squamous, so we call it stratified squamous epithelial tissue, like the skin epidermis, and this, for your information, is a dead cell. And we have for all the epithelial tissue three main functions. They perform absorbing water and digested food from the digestive canal, like the columnar epithelial tissue in the stomach and the intestine, protecting the cells from the dryness drought, from microbes like viruses and fungi and bacteria, like We have the squamous epithelial tissue, and secreting a mucus to keep the cavities soft and moist in the air, the trachea and the digestive canal. So absorbing, protecting, and secreting. The second type will be connective, but first we can see pictures of that we conclude here. The simple squamous is flat cells, simple cuboidal like cube cells, stratified, no, simple columnar we have column, and stratified the complex we have many layers like that. And if you see, we have this all layer have a base membrane with this color, base membrane, so the cells above this base membrane. And the second one is the connective tissue. Let's modify it. Just a second. Okay. The connective tissue composed of relatively distant cells, there are distance between the cells, and between these cells intercellular spaces filled with intercellular substances, and this substance here in connective tissue have types. We have semi-solid substance or solid substance or liquid substance, and according to the type of this substance we have three main types of the connective tissue. We have the proper connective tissue, we have the skeletal connective tissue, and we have the vascular connective tissue. So we have the proper connective tissue, the skeletal connective tissue, and the vascular connective tissue. Let's start with the first one and the most common type in our body, the proper connective tissue, and we call it loose connective tissue as well. So this connective tissue, this proper connective tissue, has a degree of solidity and high flexibility because the intercellular substance between the cells here is semi-solid. So we have solidity here, but not very high, and high flexibility. The function of it is connecting and attaching tissues and organs of each other in our body. Heart is connected to our body, kidneys is connected to our body by a proper connective tissue, and we can find it in two examples in our body: the skin layers, the second skin layer, like the dermis, we call it under the skin, the dermis of the skin, and the peritoneum, we call it mesentery in the small intestine, peritoneum and the dermis. The second connective tissue is called skeletal connective tissue, and we have here solid intercellular substances between cells like bones and cartilage. They are supporting our body, but the difference between them, here the cartilage and here the bones, the difference between them, this intercellular substance in the bones precipitate calcium in it, but cartilage we have no calcium, so bones is much harder than cartilage. And the vascular connective tissue, and the third one and the final one, just a minute. The vascular connective tissue, it has liquid intercellular substances to transfer the digestive food and gas and excretion. So we have here liquid intercellular substances like blood and lymph. This is a picture of the blood here, but it flowed not in its position. I don't know why. Here we have the blood, picture of the blood here. And this is a picture of the blood. So what is the difference between blood and lymph? They are both has a liquid intercellular substances, but the difference, blood consists of two types, cells and plasma. Cells like RBCs, red blood cells, white BCs, white blood cells, and platelets, and the plasma. But lymph consists of the plasma and all component of the plasma and large number of white blood cells. Muscular tissue, the third type of connective tissue, the third type of tissue, muscular tissue. And muscular tissue is all the only tissue in our body that has the ability of contract and relaxing to move our body. Muscular tissue is unique in this part and this function. So we have three types in muscular tissue, and all these types consist of cells called muscular cells or muscular fibers. We have the first type called smooth muscles, and smooth muscles is involuntary, not striated muscles. Involuntary means not controlled by the body. We can't control it. We can't control it. Not stratified, striated muscles fibers. We can find it in the wall of the digestive canal, in the wall of the urinary bladder, and the wall of the blood vessels. All the viscera, all things in the abdominal cavity and urinary system and blood vessels. In these walls, we have smooth muscles that we can't control because it involuntary muscles. And the second type, skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscles always we can find it adjacent to our skeleton, so to our bones. So we call it skeletal muscles. They are composed of striated voluntary muscles. Here, involuntary, not striated in smooth, but in skeletal, the opposite, striated and voluntary. So we can control it, we can contract it, we can relax it, and so on. They are usually found attached to the skeleton, to our bones, so it called the skeleton. And these muscles of the hand and leg and trunk and stem of us and the neck of your body and so on, each part of your body you can move it, it contains skeletal muscles. And finally, we have the cardiac muscles, and cardiac muscle composed of striated but involuntary muscles like the smooth muscles. So we can't control the pumping the heart because heart consists of cardiac muscles. Involuntary muscle, you can't control it. They are found in the walls of heart only, and only heart has cardiac muscles. Cardiac muscle contains intercalated discs, and we'll see the intercalated discs in these pictures after a while, which are attached the muscles fibers together to make the heart pump blood regularly as one functional unit together. So there are difference here in these pictures because the skeletal muscles here, like the muscles of the arm, striated, involuntary, but the cardiac muscle here, striated but involuntary, and the intercalated discs here, like I with the arrow here, intercalated discs that connects all the fibers of the cardiac muscle together to make the heart pump regularly as one functional unit. Intercalated discs is characteristic for the cardiac muscles, and the smooth muscles not striated and involuntary for us. And the last tissue is nervous tissue. And nervous tissue is responsible for regulating all the activities of the body because it receiving the stimuli from the internal and external environment and transfer it to the brain and the spinal cord, and in the brain and the spinal cord we calculate it and we processing it and re-send it to the organs to make the response like the muscles and the glands. So it receives the stimuli, the sensory stimuli from inside and outside, and transfer it to the brain and the spinal cord. Then the brain and the spinal cord resend it to the order or the message to our organs to make the response. And they are all the four types of our tissue in our body. This is the final thing in our curriculum